All right, so today we're going to be taking a deep dive into something pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
It's about the American Revolution,
Hmm.
but from a perspective that I think a lot of people don't really know much about.
Right. Yeah. It's definitely one of those untold stories that.
Yeah, it's kind of hidden in plain sight.
Exactly.
And it has to do with the role of Puerto Ricans in the American Revolution.
And I think what's so interesting about it is that it really shows how global the American Revolution was.
Right.
It wasn't just, the 13 colonies kind of doing their own thing over here.
Yeah.
I mean, there were so many other players and so many other regions of the world that were having an impact on how things unfolded.
And like I said, we don't always hear these stories. And this is one of those stories that, it's not just interesting, it's actually really important because it kind of changes the way we understand the American Revolution. So let's just jump right in. One of the things that I think is really fascinating is that there's this historical evidence that shows that Puerto Ricans actually served in the Continental Army
Right.
alongside General Bernardo de Galvez, who was the governor of Louisiana at the time.
Yeah, and his forces were so multicultural. I mean, you had people from all different backgrounds all fighting together.
Yeah, that's a great point. And, it really emphasizes those alliances that were forming during this time. You
Hmm.
think about, the American Revolution and you think about, France coming in and helping and things like that. But there are all these other sort of smaller, I don't want to say smaller, but, less talked about alliances
Right.
that were also really influential.
Yeah, and what's really cool about the Puerto Rican soldiers who fought with Galvez is that they weren't just, kind of standing around.
Right.
They were actually involved in some really key battles against the British.
Yeah, we're talking about battles like Baton Rouge, Natchez, Mobile, Pensacola. These are big, significant battles that helped to secure the Gulf Coast region.
Absolutely.
And it's amazing to think that, you had this guy, General Castro, who later became the governor of Puerto Rico.
Wow.
He fought in these very same campaigns, and, these battles were taking place across what are now several different U.S. states.
Yeah, it's a real tangible connection.
It is, yeah. It's not just, something that's happening way off in the distance. It's like right here.
Yeah.
So, Spain obviously was a huge supporter of the American cause.
Right.
And Puerto Rico, being a Spanish territory at the time, became this really important logistical hub.
And it makes sense, right? I mean, if you're thinking about,
Yeah,
the amount of resources that are needed to support a war effort, I mean, it's massive.
absolutely.
And to realize that Puerto Rico was a key channel for that support, I mean,
Yeah.
just adds so much depth to the story.
Totally. And, we often think about, the battles and the fighting and stuff, but we don't always think about, like, how do you even get all the stuff you need to do those things?
Right, exactly.
Right? Where's the food coming from? Where are the weapons coming from? Where's the money coming from to pay for all this stuff?
Hmm.
And it turns out that Puerto Rico was playing a big role in providing that support to the Continental Army.
Yeah, and especially when you consider the British blockades, I mean, that was a lifeline.
Right?
When the British were trying to cut off supplies of the colonies, Puerto Rico was a way for them to get what they needed.
So we've got Puerto Rican soldiers on the front lines with Galvez. We've got the ports, sending all these essential supplies. But the involvement goes even deeper than that because Puerto Rico itself became a battleground.
It did, and it makes you wonder how many people actually know that there was a major battle that happened in Puerto Rico
Right.
during the Revolutionary War.
During the American Revolution, yeah.
Yeah, it's called the Battle of San Juan, and it's where Puerto Rican and Spanish troops successfully defended their territory against British and German forces.
Wow.
And I mean, that's just another example of how interconnected this conflict was.
Absolutely. And so, you've got this situation where you've got Puerto Rican soldiers fighting alongside Galvez. You've got their ports providing these crucial supply lines. You've got their homeland being defended against the British. And, it's amazing to think about, even though we don't have like exact numbers of soldiers and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's clear that the evidence points to a very substantial contribution.
Right. And a contribution that continued even beyond the Revolutionary War.
That's right.
I mean, you see Puerto Ricans serving in later conflicts as well.
Absolutely. And, it's a shame that this hasn't always been given the attention it deserves.
Yeah, it's definitely been kind of overlooked in a lot of the mainstream accounts.
So, we've talked about a lot here. What do you think is like the key takeaway for people listening?
I think the biggest thing is that the American Revolution was so much more complex and so much more inclusive
Yeah.
than we often think about it.
Right. It's not just a simple story of, 13 colonies versus Great Britain.
Exactly.
It's so much more than that.
And the support from Puerto Rico is a perfect example of that. I mean, it really shows that it was a global event
Right.
with all these different groups of people contributing in different ways.
Absolutely. And I think, it's not just about, being politically correct or anything like that. It's about understanding the true history of our country
Mhm.
and understanding the fact that it was built by people from all different backgrounds.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's really important to remember, especially today.
Yeah, for sure. So, we've talked about, Puerto Ricans fighting alongside Galvez. We've talked about the supplies that they were providing, the defense of their own shores. It's just a really amazing story that I think a lot of people just don't know.
Hmm.
And, it kind of makes you think about how much more is out there that we don't know.
Right. What other stories are waiting to be discovered?
Exactly. And, I think that's the beauty of history is that there's always more to learn.
Absolutely.
And, I think it's really important for us to keep digging and keep trying to find those stories
I agree.
because it helps us to better understand who we are as a people.
Yeah,
And it helps us to better understand our past.
absolutely.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today, but thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the role of Puerto Ricans in the American Revolution.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time.
See you then.
Take care.